Hi everyone, Alice here. Welcome back to the In Your Paddock podcast, where we talk about the real decisions, challenges, and ideas shaping farming across the hills, Fleurieu and Kangaroo Island. Today we're here doing a winter feed-based reality check. What's happening on the ground right now, where the feed gaps are, and what farmers can do to stretch feed and set themselves up for the coming season. To help us unpack it, I'm joined by Anthony Pearce from Hills Farm Supplies in Mount Barker. Anthony works closely with producers right across the region and has a great handle on what's actually happening in paddocks at the moment. Anthony, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Alice. Great to ask me to be here.
For the listeners who don't know who you are, can you give us a quick snapshot of your role at Hills Farm Supplies and the types of producers you work with across the hills, Fleurieu and Kangaroo Island?
Okay, so I'm a ruminant nutritionist by trade and have a love for both pastures and feeding livestock in general. And that's what our business has really been about. And for me, it's been dairy, beef and sheep. That's what we've done for the last 15 years here. And the business is great. It gives me an opportunity to stretch far and wide. And as much as we stretch the areas that you talk about, we also end up in places as far north as, say, Hallett, right through to into the Western Districts and up through the Riverlands. So we have I guess a nice wide and varied number of customers, and it makes it an interesting thing to be doing. And it's fun working with producers.
So what are you seeing on the ground right now in terms of feed base across the hills and Fleurieu?
Yeah, look, it's been a year that's certainly different to others, and we all know we had that early break, and we've probably put ourselves in a better position in terms of feed stocks going into spring, just because we had that early break and pastures got away really well, and that's given people more feed than we anticipate at this time of year. So it's certainly been it's been a beneficial year in that respect. But looking forward, and we talk about the possibilities of the El Nino, well, we're going to need to have every bit of grass we have got in front of us, so it doesn't give us a chance to be complacent.
Yeah, are you seeing that producers are generally ahead at the moment, or a bit behind, or are they where they're expected to be at the moment?
Look, I'd like to say that we've probably been a bit ahead. We've had a better July than in terms of grass growth rates in a lot of places than we'd expect, and outside of this area, we're seeing guys in the mid north and the likes cutting silage now, and of course that's not something that we would do very often, but we've had the opportunity because of the pasture growth, or in that case crops. But
Yep.
here, people have, I guess, had that opportunity where the grass has got away, it's got enough solar panels on it, the growth rates have come up, and so therefore we are in a good position right now. But I don't want to say it's a great position, but it's a good position.
So, like with the growth now as it is, and looking at the forecasts and stuff, which is a little bit worrying, would you say people could look at like cutting their silage and hay earlier than they traditionally would? Because, around here, you normally have like the traditionalists of like we only start cutting at a certain time of the year. Would you say we should maybe open our minds to cutting a lot earlier?
Oh, look, and this is where I put my nutritionist hat on and say, absolutely, Alice, irrespective of the season, there's a lot of stuff that you see that sometimes people are making silage when really they should be making hay because they've gone that late, and it's really hay with a plastic bag around it.
Yep.
Other times people are cutting hay to the point where it really is barely better than dry standing feed. So again, this year I would say, yes, we've got good soil moisture. I'd be certainly looking at my fertility profile and what I can do to boost pasture growth rates accordingly. Because if we could cut silage earlier, we just pick up so much more quality, and that quality has a number of knock-on effects. And perhaps the most significant one is that we're able to achieve better live weight gains, better milk yields, better conception rates, all those sorts of things in whichever group of animals we're working with. And so therefore, we either get to turn cattle off earlier or we manage to hold condition for longer. So going earlier is just a thing. The traditional side is we always used to do things at certain times, and the seasons vary too much, and they're less predictable than ever. And so you've really got to take your opportunities while you can, and actually, make your own luck. And that is, be willing to cut earlier, fertilise more to get that pasture growth if you've got a planned paddock, and aim for, in a good season, get a second cut. Like last year, we got second cuts on, and even thirds on some properties because we made the most of late rains in that case.
Yeah, awesome. And what would you say about people that get stuck? They get focused on it's going to rain, we're not going to cut yet, and they hold out and hold out. Is it better to cut and risk getting that little bit of rain, or what are your thoughts on
I,
people that just hold out?
Look, I almost hear when you're saying that, Alice, it is the classic case, isn't it, that we all look at our phones and we look at our weather apps and we might look at three weather apps and one of them's telling us this much rain, this much rain. But the problem is that if we keep worrying about the rain that hasn't occurred yet but is supposedly going to occur, if we get past that possible event, then we have the next one and the next one. So it's really coming back to being more focused on where the pasture plant is at the right stage and getting it that way. It's not about getting just tons of feed. It's about yielding energy, and that's what drives the whole production system. So I think unless it looks like a significant event and you think you can hold out because your pasture's at at a stage where it can, then maybe you might hold out. But generally speaking, if you end up only getting 2 or 3 mils and we've got the crop at the right stage, that invariably ends up being better hay or better silage than going the other way with it.
Yeah, before it goes reproductive and gets too long.
Yeah, and our feed testing unit tells us that we have a portable feed testing unit here. It allows us to go out on farm and actually feed test on the spot and have the results within 30 seconds of a test. But the advantage for us is that it really does demonstrate just the variability in quality and the importance of timing, and we can demonstrate that to producers and say this stuff here is worth this much more in terms of be it kilograms of beef or milk yield because of that early cut. So we understand the value of it, but
Yep.
unfortunately people get caught up with the tonnes per hectare and rolls per hectare or squares per hectare, and it just doesn't stack up when it comes to getting kilograms of saleable meat or milk yield off of it.
Yeah, and that's where testing's so important because you can't just look and smell a hay and know that it's quality, and it can vary season to season.
And it can be a learning tool as well, Alice, whereby when you are feed testing, it starts to explain to you why animals are consuming hays better than others or why they're performing better, or bee silages as well, and then you can reflect back on what it is that you did or what it is that you planted or what did you change in your management to get that better result.
Yeah. What are the common pain points that farmers are coming to you with at the moment?
Oh, look, strange enough, if I think of my own situation here, my pain point at the moment is the oddest one of all, and that is that I've never had our ewes in such good body condition, and we're lambing right now, so I've got a higher chance of getting ewes cast than other years, but that's my own personal pain point. From a producer's point of view, it's more about they've missed, I guess, in July this year, because of the way the season rolled out, our fertiliser programs weren't quite as stringent as other years, and that's partly to do with cost as well. So they're now sort of thinking, what do we do now? When do we go actually really get in and start fertilising and getting our pasture growth, really kicking on? Because to date, they've been a bit more hesitant with, like I said, price availability. We had a pretty wet period at early July. And so it's kind of going, how do I reset myself? They're not quite sure when to pull the trigger.
Yeah, yep. And is there anything unusual or worth paying attention to with all of that? Like if they haven't put fertiliser on because they can't get on, is there a point where you just say, I'm not going in?
No, I don't think there is. I think it does come down to probably, looking at those, what paddocks are your highest performers first and getting them. But we're going the other way and saying, no, we've got to try and do a little bit of catch up here and get our pasture growth up and away as best as possible for spring, because we want those early cuts. We want that quality you've been talking about, Alice.
Yeah.
The other side of that too is, one of the challenges that was early in the season was that we had such an early break and people sowed early, but in a lot of our issues like red-legged earth mite, a cockchafer, slugs, snails, those things we weren't really able to deal with a lot of that at that point in time. So some people went really early. We've had this situation where now we're looking at a patchy paddock and what are we going to do about it? So that is a bit of a pain point, and it's also a how do we rectify it from here? So we are doing some spring sowings as a result because we still want feed,
So
But
even with the current forecast, you're still going to go in with spring sowings?
yeah, look, we haven't hesitated on some of that sort of stuff because we've got good soil moisture still. And back in 24, we actually managed to achieve some really good long-term Phaleris cocksfoot establishments, which are now doing exceptionally well. But we sowed them during that driest year in a century, and the results are great. So we're not scared of doing it. It's just like your hay cutting, just like your silage cutting. It's just
Timing.
about understanding timing.
Yeah. So are there certain pasture species and mixes that perform better this season, do you think, or that will perform better?
Oh, look, it's not so much whether they'll perform better. It's probably more the where do they fit in your system. So the Phaleris Coxfoot paddocks, once they're established, are being fantastic producers, particularly the Phaleris during winter. Um, and then, of course, we have our Coxfoot kicking a bit later. The breeding in those sorts of varieties or species has improved significantly, and so there's a lot higher quality forage there. Like when we've looked at some of our Phaleris's and we feed tested them, we can get Phaleris's that are testing 30% protein, 40 NDF, and 11 ME. Now that's fantastic forage, and there's plenty of it. So there's we're looking at those sorts of things working really well. But then it's also the multi-species, the spring multi-species are definitely worth investing in at this time of year if you've got a paddock that is going to be a bad barley grass paddock, or it's a paddock that is being used for containment in the past and it's just an underperforming paddock. They have that real opportunity to capture every millimetre of rainfall over summer and continue to produce feed out of season, which can be pretty valuable.
What are your favourite legumes for the Hills Fleurieu?
Oh, I mean, you've always got to start with what works best, and clover, of course, is fantastic for that. Years ago, we used to be, perhaps 80-20 on terms of grass, clover, and seed mixes, and we're eventually now down to sort of a 60-40 type model because we're really finding that those good clovers really just help drive the system.
Yep.
And I love complaints that we get occasionally. Like I had a complaint by someone once who told me that there was too much Balanza clover in his mix, and we'd only put a kilo in per hectare because it was smothering the pasture. But
Yep.
when you got forage quality and yield like that, I was quite happy. But we can't win them all, but it was a great outcome because we knew we'd have put a lot of nitrogen in the ground. We had a lot of grasses in around it, and it would have been a subsequent year another good paddock because of it. So I love the clovers. Lucerne can be a bit more tricky to manage and establish, but if you can get a good lucerne stand, of course, it's fantastic. But clovers in general are just so well suited to these zones.
Yeah, and the fit of brassicas in the mix.
Yep. And I've just been sorting out brassica plantings today, and look, yeah, love the use of brassicas. Probably love them more when we've actually got a bit of diversity in the mix. We speak about things like possible sort of acidosis-like effect, pulpy kidney risks, and just transitioning onto it and then getting good lamb or cattle performance off of it. When we do things like we actually add some, I guess we call familiar feeds in it, so we might actually put some shaftal Persian in there. We might put some rye corn, a little bit of ryegrass. We might do a whole series of different things that they're actually familiar with. Then they'll eventually learn to eat the brassica, but in the meantime, they're eating familiar feeds because brassicas are novel to a lot of animals, and if they're not familiar, they have that suspicion about it.
Yeah. Yep.
And we can't forget the herbs either, though, Alice, as you know.
Yeah.
They love putting chicory in those sorts of mixes too. It really helps sort of extend the season and then go into autumn quite nicely as well.
Yeah. And what do you think are the best levers that farmers have right now to stretch feed through winter, like planting some of those more novel species through
Yes.
spring?
So this is the long and the short term, Alice. So that's a really good question because when you think about that, we think about okay, what am I going to do right now? So I've got my instant levers. We could still possibly, if you're in the colder areas, use Progib or gibberellic acid. We can do that with some liquid nitrogen as a foliar. We can also, I think now we're starting at that point where we're now back and putting out granulars. So certainly looking at those key nutrients to drive production, be it nitrogen and potassium particularly, that we can get things kicked away. We've also got to consider grazing rotations right now. So start working out, sort of how we can manage those pastures to get our best pastures really firing up and getting ahead. And that can be actually making sure we're not back grazing paddocks for too long so that we have better recovery rates.
Yeah. How long would you leave animals off of a paddock to give it a bit of a rest?
Oh, look, it varies obviously throughout the year because it is dependent on leaf emergence rates, but, might be right out to up to 56 days in midwinter and come back to maybe 21 days in springtime. So,
Yep.
we've got to be careful that we're also managing forage quality amongst that. It's all very well to have bulk, but we've got to get good utilisation, and we've also got to have, tons of leaf and less stem. So our leaf to stem ratio is going to determine a lot about how good that feed is.
How would you measure your biomass to determine how much you've got in the paddock? Do you use the SIBO labs? Do you use pastures from space? What kind of, do you use tech to do that or go out and do it yourself?
Look, I've still been a bit of a go out and do it myself. And so, of course, we've always had things like the rising plate meter and the likes in the past. And so certainly use that. Certainly more interested in that space. I mean, I love the whole AI predictions and that. And even we play around and just mess around and compare our rising plate meter to, say, taking photos and uploading to some of our AI software and
Yep.
and seeing how it's reading the two parameters. But certainly in the long term, I think anyone who's going to get on board, like using, as we've spoken in the past about, the adoption of things like Halter, combining that with the likes of, say, SIBO Labs or Pasture IO or whatever, and using all those tools to be able to make a much better assessment of not only how much feed's in front of you, but being able to assess, what your residual is so that you're getting that right, and then monitor your pasture growth rates behind you as well. So what your recovery rates are like.
Yeah, keeping some ground cover there so you're not starting from scratch every time. All these different varieties or the hay and silage, what kind of supplements or feed options do you think farmers are leaning on most for this winter?
Okay, so it's generally speaking, of course, a lot of people rely on hay during this winter period, and that's all well and good, but we've got to really understand what the quality of that hay is again, and the importance of making sure you just allocate it to the right animal. So hay's been always heavily used at this time of year, although this year certainly, hay sales are down, and that's great because that means people got more pasture and that's if we can grow more feed on farm, that's a better thing.
Yep.
Supplements, look, the key supplements generally are things like if we've got cow-calf herds, it's magnesium and stuff like that we're making sure that we're covering off for conditions like grass tetany. Lambing ewes, same sort of thing, high calcium, high magnesium. Supplementation is useful. But beyond that too, we've got to think, this is where we talk about the role of minerals within plants. And so the value of having herbs there, for example, can be that we can shift a grass-dominant pasture being at, say, 0.3 to 0.4% calcium. We can move that right up to being 1.3 or 1.4% calcium. And
Yeah.
magnesium's the same. We can take that from 0.2 to 0.4. So we're getting some cover from having the right pasture species. Legumes do the same, but they're not quite as prevalent as the likes of, say, plantain in winter.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, not discounting, instead of just supplementing in a tub or in a block, it's actually getting your pasture composition right so it is actually providing minerals then and there with every mouthful.
Yeah, and that comes down to like root depth and all that sort of stuff, bringing it up from further down, yeah?
Yeah, you got to love that about the ability of our herbs and even loosening that matter for being able to drag stuff up from further down the profile and bring it back to the top. It's something that shallow-rooted grasses and the likes aren't capable of doing. But from an animal's point of view, every mouthful now has a better mineral profile to it. That's a benefit. You spoke about Sulla in the past, Alison. You mentioned from your end, you said that's got a different mineral profile, again, to our herbs. So that's another one that needs to be probably reinvestigated as to what that means from a livestock nutrition point of view.
Yeah, not a lot done on that. But
No.
Are you seeing any common mistakes made around your supplementary feeding? Like people getting it wrong?
Absolutely. It's more, we spoke about traditional when we talked about hay and silage, and particularly hay. Traditional is you just feel compelled to still be feeding. And so, if the grass is good enough and the grass there is enough of it, feeding out hay and actually smothering pastures and wasting it is just an unnecessary cost. You might still want 1 or 2 kilos, and that can help slow down what we call fractional outflow rate, which is the rate that contents move through the GI tract of the animal.
Mm-hmm.
But that only needs to be enough to slow it down so we're getting good nutrient uptake, but not beyond that. And so some people still feel compelled to feed 3, 4, 5 kilos to the cows, and they may only eat 2 of it, so the rest of it's left there, which makes your hay twice as expensive, but it also means that it's left there to damage and smother pastures like a mulching.
Yeah. Yep. And sometimes they're not eating it because it's so poor quality, they just know and they just can't eat it.
And that's very true. Cows and sheep are just like us. They actually gravitate towards sugar. So if you've got a low sugar content hay, i.e., it's being heavily weather damaged, the palatability is quite low. And of course, if you've got some nice, high sugar grasses because you've got them at the right leaf stage, they're just not that interested.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
it's just not. It's an effort that you're putting in that you don't need to be putting in. So yeah, I'd say you really got to read your animals in this case and go, well, if they're not consuming it and they're doing well and all those things, then maybe I don't need to be feeding it.
Yeah. What do you think farmers should be really thinking about now to set themselves up for spring? Like we've talked about fertiliser and stuff like that. What about weed control and
Yeah, look,
yeah.
we're still actually finishing off. It's a late season, as strange as it is. There is still some broadleaf control going on, and that is still key if you can, because it's really about what nutrients are present in the soil getting allocated to the right species or grasses and clovers and the likes that we want it to. And when we have things like capeweed, for example, in the system, capeweed, notoriously high in potassium, can actually therefore increase incidence of milk fever, grass tetany, those types of conditions. But of course, about now it starts to really flip in terms of palatability. And so you've got all this pasture space being taken up by a plant that animals don't want to eat. Nutritionally, it's declining, and it's not going to be there at the end of the season. It is going to impact on yield and quality of whatever we intend to conserve or whatever we intend to continue to graze.
Yeah, and it just affects you for next year as well.
Yeah, it's ongoing. So, we just got to have those things where we're moving the system into, I guess, a position that we want it to be, rather than just letting it play out and thinking you're too late on, say, capeweed. It's still best to at least suppress it and hold it back so better species can take its place.
What indicators do you look for to tell you that the season's turning? Like it's that time. Got any
Look,
special indicators?
the cynical bit of me say it stopped raining.
Yep.
Um, oh, look, it's usually, I think certainly when you start seeing just pastures really starting to bolt, particularly like, when things like soft brome and that try and throw up ahead and the likes, those plants generally seem to be fairly clever at going, actually, I think we better move through our reproductive phase while we still got a chance.
Yep.
But, it's hard to say. Like I said, season variability is certainly, more than it's ever been. And sometimes we have those dry spells and then we get a rain that's not predicted later and we pick up an inch or 2 inches and that kicks things on again. So you just really got to play it out and go, okay, if it's starting to get tight, we really need to start thinking about what are we doing to grow more feed? How are we going to cut more silage right now? And if it rains again, that's a bonus. But if it doesn't, at least you've then made the right moves to get what you can based on how you see the season rolling.
Yeah, so for the farmers that are a bit borderline on feed, which I can't imagine there'd be too many around at the moment, but maybe there are some on those outer areas. Like how do they decide whether they've got to buy feed or sell stock or adjust rotations?
Yeah, look, I mean, that is certainly there's a couple of things to that. One is actually understanding what feed stocks you've got behind you. So, if you've got good hay stocks behind you, you can feel a little bit more comfortable about things. But if I was looking down the barrel of really not having much hay behind me, and I'm on top of my pastures now, I'd be thinking, okay, well, we need to be really looking to offload stock shortly. Stock prices are very good at the moment, so it's an opportunity to just start to reduce stocking rates now, and therefore free up more feed for be it the breeders or if you're growing out, heavy steers and those sorts of things, so that you can actually still make sure that at the end of spring you're still able to turn off animals that are ready to go as they normally would in another season. But if you try to, I guess, carry everything, you're just at risk of getting to the end of the season, having nothing finished and having nothing conserved, and then you've got to limp into the next year.
Yeah, and start on the back foot.
Yeah, very much so. So, I'd be saying right now you might look and go, okay, well, we might do an early wean, and we might take out a portion of the group that normally we'd carry through. We just might cut that back, and that decision is, you really need to, I guess, sit down and work out yourself, or have someone give you some advice on that. But just being able to, know that you got to pull the trigger and not hang off and hope.
Yeah. Well, on a bit of a close off then, if you had to give a farmer or farmers 3 practical priorities for the next 4 to 6 weeks, what would they be?
Okay, three. One is, and the first one is most important, is the planning. Like right now, and I think, if we said this week, if we're sitting down, what do we need to do? We need to plan out what we need to do to grow more grass while we got moisture. So have I got my fertiliser organised? Do I know how my stock are travelling? Have I got my broadleaf under control? And then sort of going, how do I make sure all those things are ticked off? And
Yep.
then in this next 4 to 6 week period, it's really, I'd be saying, instead of having that mentality of this is my silage, this is my hay paddock, start looking forward and actually working out, have I got a surplus in front of me? And if I do, how can I make that a bigger surplus? If I don't have one, how can I even make a surplus? So that you can get in and guarantee yourself that we're going to be able to store some conserved feeds for a summer. And if it's a long summer, we may need plenty of it. So the more you can, the better. So
Yep.
those two things. And thirdly, grazing strategy in paddocks. And it can be two ways. Is that your best paddocks right now may be doing very well, but you may have some other paddocks that are, let's say, more barley grass than we'd like, less favourable species, but the quality's still okay at the moment because it's just the way it generally is, that all plants have windows where their quality is reasonable. So what you might consider doing is grazing them a little bit harder, and therefore allowing a bit of extra pasture growth through a bit of an extra rest on some of your better paddocks, so you can get them away and build a feed wedge. And
Yeah.
and that way, then you really can put yourself in a spot where, you haven't damaged your best pastures, really rewarded them, and paddocks that you see less value in. Well, maybe after you've finished doing that grazing, you might decide to take them out and put a spring pasture in or something to that effect. But just really thinking about how is your grazing affecting growth rates and total yield in pastures.
Yep. And what is one thing that farmers could do this week that would make a difference?
The one thing this week that could make a difference. I like that. I was going to say, tell your family that you love them is probably the first thing you could do.
No.
Uh, After that, I hope my wife listens to this now. But beyond that, it's really, I think it comes back down to what I said earlier, and it is just planning what needs to be done to make a good spring, because it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day work, and just forget that. But just thinking, okay, well, rather than being cynical about seasonal forecasts and that, like I said, if an El Nino is coming, just think about what is your current position, and therefore you can start to make some moves tactically to go, okay, do I need fertiliser? How much do I need? Do I need to look at my stocking rates? That would be the most valuable thing you could do right now from my end anyway. And just assess, are you in a comfortable position or not?
Yep. Well, thank you so much for that, Anthony. It's been great to chat with you. Better let you go and check some more paddocks now.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually the truth too.
Well, thanks, Anthony. We really appreciate your time and the practical insights. If you're listening and want to keep building confidence heading into spring, make sure you follow the podcast and check out our show notes for the links to Fleurieu Farming Systems, upcoming workshops, and ways to get involved. We'll also include a link to Hills Farm Supplies and Anthony. Our next episode will dive into the tools and tech that make decisions easier, from feed budgeting apps to virtual fencing and weigh scales. Spread the word, get your neighbours onto it, and we'll see you next month right here in your paddock. As we wrap up today's winter feed-based reality check, a few clear takeaways stand out. This early break has given producers a genuine head start, but it's not a season to sit back. Timing is the lever that will determine who stays ahead and who gets squeezed. Anthony highlighted 3 practical priorities to act on now. Reset your fertiliser program, target your highest performing paddocks first, and lift growth heading into spring. Tighten your grazing rotations, protecting recovery, avoid back grazing, and keep leaf to stem ratios high. Take early conservation opportunities when you can. Cut silage and hay at peak quality, not when tradition says you should. And underpinning all of this is smart species selection. Choosing the right mix isn't just about yield, it's about mineral profile, feed quality, and resilience. Multi-species blends with clovers, herbs like plantain and chicory, and deep-rooted grasses like Phleurieu and cocksfoot can dramatically lift calcium, magnesium, protein, and Me, helping animals perform better with every mouthful. These mixes also stretch feed further, support soil health, and keep paddocks productive when the season tightens. Across the hills, Fleurieu and KI, the message is consistent. Quality beats bulk, diversity beats simplicity, testing beats guessing, and early action beats waiting for the perfect forecast. If you read your paddocks, trust your timing, and make the most of your feed in front of you, you'll roll into spring with stronger pastures, better animal condition, and far more options. Keep up to date with Fleurieu farming systems through our socials and website. If you enjoyed listening, please follow us and share with anyone you think would benefit. Join us next month for episode 3, Tools that Make Decisions Easier, like apps, virtual fencing and weigh systems. These podcasts are made possible through the Future Drought Regional Drought Resilience Program, co-funded by the Commonwealth of Australia and the Government of South Australia.